This study is trying to find what the Bible may say about when the time of trouble will be. Matthew 24, verse 3, the disciples had been just asking Jesus about this very question. It says, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be?'" So this study comes from Matthew 24 in our attempt to see what Jesus said about the timing of the time of trouble and the end of the world. When I was 16 years old, I gave my first sermon. And predictably, it was on the end times and the signs of Jesus' coming. We know the list. There's wars and rumors of wars. And I found newspaper clippings that showed current events that were an application of wars and rumors of wars. And then there's famines, and I showed examples from the newspaper of famines in other parts of the world. And there's pestilences, and I showed examples from history of different pandemics. And earthquakes. Jesus told to look for earthquakes. And I showed examples from the newspaper of earthquakes. Actually, the one that I showed was in Alaska. And we know from that list that Jesus gave in Matthew 24, it says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and then shall the end come." I showed how the gospel had gone to every language group in every country of the world. But where is the promise of his coming? That sermon I gave when I was 16 was over 50 years ago. And though I have never doubted that Jesus was coming soon, I think we all thought it would be before now. Now let's go back to this quote from Jesus trying to answer the question of how long will these things be. We pick up the story in Matthew 24, verse 1 and 2. "Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, 'Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down.'" Verse 3, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?'" The disciples didn't realize that they were asking about two different events. They thought that the destruction of Jerusalem would be at the second coming of Jesus and the end of the age. Jesus didn't correct them because they couldn't understand or handle the truth at that point. So he answered both questions, as only divinity can do, with one answer that applied to both events. Matthew 24, verse 3, notice the underline, "Tell us, when will these things be?" So our question today is, when will the end be? We're going to go through Matthew 24, and if you've followed any of my other seminars, you know I like to make graphic illustrations of what we're talking about. And in this case, because it has to do with the sequence of time, we're going to make a time chart. Matthew 24, verse 4 to 6. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. So the first part of this chart is from verses 4 to 6. There'll be false Christs and wars and rumors of wars. Well, we've always had wars and rumors of wars, but in that last 50 years, I've seen at least two examples of people that claim to be Christ. Again, verses 4 to 6, but now let's notice the last sentence. See that you not be troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. So, our first line on our chart, differentiating the first group of signs of the end and further ones, is that Jesus said in verse 6, the end is not yet. Verses 7 and 8, for nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. So, we're going to have during this next phase of the signs that Jesus gave, international tensions, famines, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places. Verse 7 and 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. So, the beginning of sorrows. And I would like to suggest that that indicates the Sunday law, national Sunday law in the United States. I'm just speculating this, but I think as we move along, you'll see how this might be the case. Verses 9 and 10. Then, so after that event, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. And you'll be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. You can see how this National Sunday Law on our time chart could be the beginning of the time of trouble, the tribulation, it says. And we know during the little time of trouble that there's going to be martyrs, there's going to be persecution for people that will not accept the mark of the beast. Verses 11 and 12. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Verse 13 and 14, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world as a witness to all nations. So in this next phase of our time chart, which is after the beginning of sorrows, we have persecution, we have conflict, we have false prophets, we have deception, we have iniquity, we have no love, and we have the gospel going to all the world. Now think about it, that after there's a Sunday law and the little time of trouble goes, the progression of persecution will get more and more intense as time goes along during the little time of trouble. And the gospel will be going to all the world because the next phase is the close of probation at the end of the little time of trouble. So it's logical that the final push of getting the gospel to the world would be just before the close of probation, when no longer would anyone have a choice. And we call this time period the loud cry. We know from Joel 2 that God's going to pour out his spirit on all flesh. We know that there's going to be a loud cry, the final push to evangelize the world, to give every human being an opportunity to choose whether to accept the mark of the beast or be part of God's final remnant. Verses 13 and 14 at the end, it says, and then the end will come. So, verse 14, our division, our timeline mark here is the end, the close of probation. I am suggesting verse 14. Verses 15 and 16. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now we know from a previous study in this series that this did apply to the destruction of Jerusalem. You will recall that Jesus is answering two questions with one answer. So the prophecy of the abomination of desolation by Daniel the prophet applies to two different events. It's a double application. The first one, the abomination of desolation, was the Roman soldiers surrounding the city of Jerusalem and being on the holy ground. The end time application of the abomination of desolation has to do with the Sunday law and the increasing pressure to accept the mark of the beast and ultimately Satan coming as Christ. Verses 16 to 20. Let him who's on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. Let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, those who are nursing babies in those days, and pray that your flight be not in the winter or on the Sabbath. So this is clearly talking about after probation closes, after there's a death decree, Jacob's time of trouble. Verses 21 and 22, and then there'll be a great tribulation. Notice the other one said a tribulation. This is the great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until that time, no, nor ever shall be. So this is clearly Jacob's time of trouble. Unless those days be shortened, no flesh will be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Verses 23 to 26. Then, if anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, and there, do not believe it, for false Christs and false prophets will arise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if I say to you, look, here he's in the desert, do not go. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. Verse 27 and 28, for as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. So this phase of our timeline after the close of probation, called the end, is the beginning of the great time of trouble and Jacob's time of trouble. There's the abomination of desolation. There's the fleeing to the mountains because there's a death decree. There's Jacob's time of trouble and a false second coming by Satan. Verse 29 to 31 says, immediately after the tribulation in those days. So notice it's a time thing again. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. So this is the end of the time of trouble when the saints will be delivered. Verse 29 and verse 13. 29 to 31, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened. The moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the heavens. So, once the time of trouble ends, the second coming is underway. And it's a sequence of events. There's the sun and the moon going dark. The wicked are mourning and calling for the rocks to fall on them at the brightness of his coming. They get destroyed. And Jesus comes in the clouds and calls forth the righteous saints that are dead. Thessalonians says the dead in Christ will rise first, and then we that are alive and remain will meet him in the air. So you'll notice that Jesus is not touching the ground, and he warned that if this person claims to be the second coming of Christ and he's on the ground or he's not being seen around the world at the same time, then it's a false Christ. So what might we learn about our time and when the time of trouble will begin? Well, let's look at the middle part of this chart. I'm suggesting, and this is speculation, but I'm suggesting that this first couple of phases on our timeline from verse 4 through 7 and 8 is our present day until the time of the end. And that begins with the Sunday law and the little time of trouble when there's persecutions and the gospel makes the final push to the world. And then we have the end in verse 14, which I believe is the close of probation, when everyone has made their final decision. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is holy, let him be holy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. Then we have the great and Jacob's times of trouble. So that's in two phases, as we've learned in our uh, episode, our training study about the three times of trouble. We have the little time of trouble. We have the great time of trouble when the plagues start falling. And then when the wicked notice that the righteous are not being affected by the plagues, then they make a death decree to get rid of the righteous, and that begins Jacob's time of trouble and fleeing to the mountains. Matthew 24:36 and 37. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. So when will the end be? Well, we don't know for sure because no man knows the day or the hour. Matthew 24:44. Therefore also you should also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So when will the end be? When we don't expect it. That's when it's going to be. And we're told to be ready, consequently. Verse 13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. So when will the end be? We don't know the day or the hour, but we should watch the signs. Notice the beginning of the verse, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor hour. So it's true we don't know the day or the hour, but we're supposed to watch for the signs. Verse 34, but take heed to yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and that the day come on you unexpectedly. So when will the end be? The day will come unexpectedly. So don't get weighed down with the cares of this life. Verse 32 and 33. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know it is near, even at the doors. So when will the end be? You should know the season, even though you don't know the day or the hour. You should know it because you'll know when it's close and it's near, even at the door. How will you know? By watching the signs. So this completed chart can be downloaded from preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com, and this presentation is part 194 if you want full details. The chart's available for download at the end of the list of segments in the seminar, but if you want to review this again and how we built the chart, it's part 194. Additionally, this is a good introduction to the question. We looked at when will these things be? When will the time of trouble be? But the Bible also gives us some clues about how long will the time of trouble be. When I've done presentations at churches or camp meetings, when there's questions and answers, inevitably someone will ask, how long do you think the time of trouble is going to be? How long will it be that we have to suffer from not being able to buy and sell? We have counsel to move out of the cities into the country so we can grow a garden, because the time of trouble of not buying and selling and the little time of trouble is going to be a serious problem if you don't have the ability to grow food. So it's a valid question to ask, how long will this time of trouble be? Because do we need to know how to do a garden for one season or more than one? I think the Bible gives some clues to that. So there's an in-depth study that can go into this in detail. I believe the answer comes from Daniel 12, like we found Matthew 24 in this study. Daniel 12 speaks specifically about this, and the question is asked right in the scripture, how long will these things be? And the answer, I believe, is in the response to that question. And so for an in-depth study on this subject, if you're interested, it's parts 7 through 15 in preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.